Gurubhyo Namah to both the superstars of Jyotish. Marc Boney ji, as you all know, is an international author, and recently he has been conferred a very high award, a prestigious award by none other than K.L. Rao himself. And that is not just a pride for him as a student of K.L. Rao, but also to us all who are all part of the Jaimini Jyotiṣa Sangha, which is the group created by Marc Boney, for his students who have learnt the principles of Jaimini as taught by K.L. and as followed by Marc Boney himself. And to add the icing to the cake, we have our beloved Shri Guruji, Shri Dhilip Kumarji, joining us in this conversation. And probably it's going to be a presentation or a discussion taken along by Shri Marc Boney. And as you all know, to the people here in Chennai and to people in India, the astrologers, this is an opportunity that is coming up in the near future, in another 10 days' time, if I'm not mistaken, uh, to attend a session live by legend Marc Boney. Why I say this is because a couple of days back I had a conversation with other fellow astrologers, and I said I'm not going to miss this for anything in my life. The reason being that just as how we miss or we don't have the opportunity at the moment to attend K.N. Rao's sessions, I'm not going to miss this session by Marc Boney, definitely, because he brings forward the tradition and the emphasis of whatever K.N. Rao has meant for in Vedic astrology. He brings it forward. He carries the torch forward. So I'm not going to miss this for anything. And it is a really great pleasure to see both my gurus, Sri K. Sir and Marc Boney ji, together on the same platform. And I request Marc Boney ji to come forward with a few details about the session. And it is, I think, in the coming on the 13th of this month, February, if I'm not mistaken. So, Dilip sir, yeah, Dilip sir, would you like to give an intro about Marc Boney ji and your experience with Gemini? So, Marc,
I mean, when the master is here, we are not supposed to speak about something that, it's obvious that I have always stuck to, Parashara text. And of course, I keep using conveniently whenever I want. I will use Gemini Sutras also. But, in one lifetime, you can't master so many things. So I just, you know, um, felt I was happy with Parashara text, and I went on with that for this 32 years. But occasionally I will, like for example, Nicha Graha and Upapada Lagna, that rule I have been using like anything for my consultations whenever it comes to people who got divorced. And it will be staring in the face. Like most of the time, Upapada Lagna and Mars in the Upapada Lagna is the most common thing I've seen in my life. So I know everything works, right? So it's almost like saying every tool works. Depending upon the situation, you got to use the tool. You have now the opportunity that you're meeting a person who's one of the favorite students of Sri K.N. Rao ji. I've been reading his articles and books for a very long time. And just to let you know, I have purchased most of the the digital version of Marc Boney ji's book from Amazon. Even though in some of the classes he did offer it for free, I still purchased it as a mark of respect to an author. And I know he has done 22 books, I think, so far. Am I right, Marc Boney ji?
Well, the number's up to 35.
Okay. Every year it just keeps adding, right? And it's all for the good for all of us. And the awards he has received from Sri K.N. Rao ji, just one more feather in the, maybe golden feather or platinum feather in his cap. So we are now eager to, we all eagerly look forward to learning from him. And we welcome him to Chennai. Though I'll not be in station on up to 15th, but I'm sure I'll be there on 16th.
I look
I'll
forward
catch
to
up.
seeing you.
So he's not just an expert like only in astrology. I think he has he's also into yoga and Ayurveda and whatnot, right? The Vedic culture. He's so much the Indian, I think. Okay. And when you see him in our Indian dress, he will fit so perfectly the Indian Vedic culture. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the kind words. As I think many of you know, I always start any session with some Sanskrit prayers, so permit me to do that now. Om Gananantva Ganapatigan Havamahe, Priyanantva Pripatigan Havamahe, Nidhinantva Nidipatigan Havamahe, Vaso Mama Aham Jani, Gabrinamaha Mama Jasi Gabridam, Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Deva Maheshwara, Guru Deva Brahma, Tasmai Shri Guru Nama, Tasmai Shri Guru Nama, Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahana Vunaktu, Sahaviryam Karvavahe, Tejasvina, Vaditamastu, Mavid Vishavahe, Om Shanti, 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. So I'd like to thank everyone for the kind invitation to be with you today. I actually consider it an honor. I think this is a very passionate group of students taught by a wonderful teacher who has a passion for Jyotish, right? And so we all share that in common. And as you all heard, of course, I learned Jyotish from K.N. Rao, actually now starting 32 years ago. And I practice, you might say, in his style. So the first thing I wanted to do is to say a little bit about that particular style of doing Jyotish. And you can all let me know when you should be seeing a document on the screen, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So his style of doing Jyotish is a rather, you might say, complex and sophisticated one, but in keeping with what is in the tradition. And so the different elements of that is the simultaneous use of both the Parashari and Jaimini systems, both for seeing static potentials in a birth chart, but also for timing events. What this means is that, for example, if someone's asking you about the potential time when they would get married, if you see that potential being expressed in the planetary periods of Parashari and the sign-based periods of Jaimini, then you might say you have a stronger indication that the event is going to take place at this time. He called it doing like the cross-check. I call it seeing confluence between the two systems, right? And then another element was the use of alternative lagnas. So in, of course, Parashari Jyotish, we have Chandra Lagna, we have Dasha Lagna. In Jaimini, Sir just mentioned things like Upapada Lagna and Karakamsha Lagna and Aruda Lagna. These are special lagnas that are used in the Jaimini system. And then there's also the extensive use of divisional charts, which is what I'm going to get into today. And of course, the application of multiple dashas, both planetary and sign-based dashas when timing an event. K.N. Rao would sometimes use up to 5 dashas when he's really trying to zero in on an event. When he predicted, actually, the tragic death of Indira Gandhi, he actually had used 5 different dashas to see how they were all showing basically the same thing, the danger to her at that time. And one of the things I'm going to be emphasizing in my presentation today is some very simple principles that I've found very effective for making predictions with divisional charts. Because, of course, these are some of the more subtle and complex elements of Jyotish. I once heard K.N. Rao said, Jyotish without divisional charts is a rather crude affair, but with divisional charts, if you have accurate divisional charts, you can predict brilliantly, which is what he could do and what I've been able to do to some degree. So the principles I'm talking about, number one, is when a planet is placed in the lagna of a divisional chart, it has a special ability to bring significant events pertaining to that division in its periods and subperiods. Now, of course, this depends upon a birth time that's accurate enough to give the correct divisional lagna. That's always kind of, unfortunately, the question. But if the planet truly is in the lagna of some divisional chart a person runs that period, you'll see significant events happen as it pertains to the affairs of life governed by that division. So, of course, if you then have 2 planets together in the lagna divisional chart and you run the period and subperiod of those planets, then you'll see the event almost invariably comes out significant related to the affairs of that particular division. Now, this is going to be especially true if such planets have sources of strength, if they're well associated, like with benefics, and they're forming good yogas. The second principle that I found to be very effective and I've used to predict is significant events pertaining to that division will occur in the period and subperiod of any two planets that are just in a special condition, regardless of whether placement by house or lordship, or whether or not they're connected. If they're just in special conditions, period and subperiod. By special condition, I mean exalted, mula trikona, om sign, bhagotama, exchange of signs, or nichabanga. So if you're running the period and subperiod of two planets in a divisional chart in any of these two conditions, whether or not they're connected, regardless of their house placement, you'll see significant events, again, happen relative to the meaning of that division. Now, lastly, the third principle I want to talk about today is one that I've again found working very well. A period and subperiod lord who are just strongly connected. Again, they don't necessarily need to be in any sort of special source of strength or dignity, but if they're just connected, and sambandha is the word used in the ancient classics, and what this means is they're either conjunct, they're in a mutual aspect, they're in an exchange in that division, or in a situation where some planet is in the sign of some planet and also gets the aspect of that planet. Some type of sambandha that's oftentimes overlooked by students. So having laid these three principles out, I want to share screen with my program and illustrate what I'm talking about. And then I'm going to get into like my main theme of today after I show these illustrations. So you should all be seeing a chart, right, with Capricorn Lagna, yes? Somebody verify you're seeing the chart with Capricorn Lagna?
Yeah, we do.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So the divisional chart that we use to predict events related to property and purchase of property, home purchase, and so on is, of course, D4, Shatrashamsha. And I used this gentleman's, is an Indian man living and working in the US. I used this man's D4 to predict some really good fortune, some purchase of expensive real estate in his sun major period, which if you look at the Vimchotri Dasha, was back in 2020. He was completing his Venus major period, 20 years. He was asking me to give him input about the upcoming sun period. One of the things that I saw is that in his D4, you could see the sun is in the Lagna, and I knew the birth time to be very accurate. And you could see that the sun is in the Lagna of D4 and in a very excellent condition. It's exalted. And it gets the additional influence of the natural benefic Jupiter, but also Saturn. And so I indicated to him that this could be a very fortunate time this way. And what ended up happening, he won quite a bit of money, millions actually, in Bitcoin. And as a result of this, he decided to build a $2.5 million home, pay cash for it. And this is what happened in the sun major period. In fact, it was exactly in Sun Jupiter, the two planets connected in D4, that he then took possession of it. So this is an example of when you have a strong planet placed in the Lagna divisional chart, you run this period, significant events happen with respect to that. Now, if you have two planets together in a divisional chart, then when a person runs that period and subperiod, you'll see again, almost invariably, something significant happens, again, with respect to the meaning of that division. So I'm going to pull up the chart of a much younger sister of mine, whose birth of a child I predicted in her Venus K2 period and subperiod. Now, predicting childbirth for her in her Venus period was not at all difficult because you can see back in the birth chart itself, the Rashi, Venus is actually right in the fifth house, right? And she had recently married. And so the fact that she was going to have children was a rather easily predictable sort of thing. But why a particular subperiod? Why the K2 subperiod? Well, if I show you the Saptamsha, you'll see that Venus is with K2 in the Saptamsha, along with the natural karak of children, Jupiter, in its exaltation sign. So again, it was on this, because if you look at K2 in the birth chart, as a subperiod lord, you wouldn't necessarily see that as being a subperiod that could give this event. maybe because it gets the aspect of the fifth Lord Saturn, but really that would not be an obvious thing. Here, the fact that they're together is rather an obvious sort of thing, right? So this is what I mean about two planets together in the lagna of a divisional chart. One more example of this, I predicted that this person, who was a 9-year-old boy, would be getting a sibling based on his Drekana. And let me find the chart here. All right, here it is. Let me pull up the Drekana. So I was using the charts of three family members, the father, the mother, and then they had this son in order to predict the birth of a child. They had had a child, but then 9 years had gone by. They'd been trying to have another child unsuccessfully, but I identified a period back in the summer of 2022 where I thought there was a window of opportunity. And one of the ways I was able to confirm that is the fact that their one son who was running the moon major period. Now, in the birth chart, you can see that the moon is in fact connected to the third house, third lord of younger siblings, because the moon is in a mutual aspect with Venus, the third lord, and then Jupiter aspects the third house. But what really convinced me that he would have a sibling, a younger sibling in moon Jupiter, was the Drekana, where you see the moon right in the lagna of the Drekana, and it is aspected by Jupiter, and they actually form a good yoga. Of course, they form that moon-Jupiter combination referred to as Gajikesari Yoga. So this is, again, just an example of a planet in the lagna of a divisional chart having a special ability to bring affairs related to that. Now, I also mentioned that when you have the period and subperiod of just two planets in an exceptional dignity, in a divisional chart, whether or not where they're connected or whether or not in the lagna, that period and subperiod usually brings a significant event this way as well. And so I want to show you an example of a prediction I made based on this. So it was back in 2014, I was teaching Jyotish in Russia, and I was teaching how to predict childbirth. And after showing them the technique for doing this, I asked somebody in the audience who had been, recently married, if we could use his chart to look at when then he might have children. And I was looking, of course, at D7. And at this time, in Vimshottari Dasha, he was running Venus-Mars. Now, of course, just based on the birth chart, you could see Venus, a strong Venus, aspecting onto his fifth house. And of course, Mars rules the fifth house of the Rashi. So you could have made this prediction based on that. But what I was also seeing was that in his D7, Mars is in its own sign, Venus is in its own sign, Vargotama, relative to this division. And this looked like a really promising time for giving this. And so I was sharing this with him, and he had kind of this smile on his face. And then he raised his hand and told me that that morning his wife had told him she was pregnant. And he did have a child then in Venus-Mars. So again, this is an example of a period and subperiod of two planets, the fact that they're in a very good dignity in a divisional chart, bringing in a significant event that way. Now, the other thing I mentioned is just two planets connected in a divisional chart. When you run that period and subperiod, this can also give this. I'm going to bring up the chart of formerly Prince Charles, now King Charles of England. And he had his very famous marriage to Diana, who became Princess Diana, in his moon Jupiter period and subperiod, something I had foreseen. Now, if you look at the birth chart, you'd be you'd be hard pressed to predict marriage in moon Jupiter just based on the birth chart. But if you looked at Navamsha, you can see that they are together. They're well placed there. They're in the ninth house. They form that Moon-Jupiter combination. But the key point that I'm making here is that they are just together. And so this is another principle that I've taught and used effectively in order to predict based on divisional charts. And I've sort of laid out those three principles and I've now illustrated this. I want to stop for a moment and see if there's any comments or questions about anything I've said before I go on further here. Well, it doesn't appear so. So now you all know that the Mahakumbha Mela is going on at the moment. And of course, millions and millions of people are attending to this, and I'm going to be one of them. I'm scheduled to be there and take my ritual bath in Ganges on February 9th. And when some of my students found out that I was doing this, they had decided to accompany me. And since then, I've also been gathering some charts of other people that I know are attending the Mela. And so I decided to do a little research about that in terms of how this gets reflected astrologically. And what would be the divisional chart? Who can say what would be the divisional chart having to do with spiritual activities?
Vimsamsa.
Vimshamsha, D20, right?
Yes.
So this is the kind of thing that I wanted to share with you this morning because it's kind of topical with everybody attending the Mela. And I'm going to pull up the chart. I have a student, a longtime student of mine, who's actually been studying with me since 2015. He'll be there in Chennai. His name is Dhruv. He lives in Dhruv Singh. He lives in Varanasi. And he's the one that invited me to come to Varanasi and then go to the Kumbh from there. And I'm trying to pull up his chart here. Here it is. And I want to pull up D20. That's not what I wanted to do. Oh gosh, I messed up here. You know what? I'm going to pull up the, all right, D20. Oops. Can everybody see the D20 now? Yes, it's in the North End style.
Yes, we can.
It's kind of elongated. So if you look at the Vimshotri Dasha, you can see that Dhruv is running in the period of Venus and Saturn. Venus and Saturn. What do people notice about Venus and Saturn in his Vimshamsha? What's their condition?
It's
Mutual aspects.
house.
What's their condition? What's their dignity? I'm talking about in Vimshamsha.
Venus exalted.
Exalted.
And Saturn?
Exalted.
Exalted.
Yes, both exalted.
Remember the principle that I said. When two planets in a divisional chart are in exceptional dignity, whether or not they're connected, despite what house they may fall in or what house that they rule, the person runs that period and subperiod, you will see significant events related to that sphere of life happen. And so here going to the Kumbh Mela is a spiritual religious activity, right? And so you'll see this is how it's being reflected in his D20. So now I'm going to pull up the chart of another student that's coming with us. And again, I'd like you to look at what period and subperiod he's running and what's the condition and situation of those planets in his Vimshamsha. Now you can see that he's running Moon Jupiter. Where is the moon? Look at where the moon is placed in the Vimshamsha. Right in the first house. Remember that idea. And then who's it in a mutual relationship with? Of course, it's Jupiter. And they form the Moon Jupiter yoga. Right? So this is a demonstration of the other principle I was talking, two principles. Planet in the Lagna of a divisional chart, and then the idea of the period and subperiod of two planets strongly connected in a particular divisional chart. Now let me show you the chart of another individual that will be accompanying us, again, a longtime student of mine. And these things can show up in different ways. First of all, if you look down at the Vimshottri Dasha, you can see that this person is running Saturn Mars. And there are two planets together, including the Lagna Lord in the ninth house. So maybe just based on the Rashi, you could say something of this nature could be happening at this time. But again, what do you notice about Saturn and Mars in the Vimshamsha? Do they not make a mutual aspect? They make a mutual aspect. That's exactly what I wanted people to see. Again, this principle of two planets strongly connected in a divisional chart. You run that period and sub-period. Something significant happens, event, with regards to that area of life. Now, I'm going to show you yet another person who is accompanying us. This time a woman, student of mine, from Spain.
Marc Boney, we have in the beginning you showed the divisional charts in two formats, both the South Indian and the North Indian at the
Right.
bottom, whereas now it's only the North Indian. So some of us have to spend some extra time, grasping the North Indian chart. So we would
I'm sorry. I'm glad you mentioned that. Let me get you
yes, we
what you
got it.
need.
Yeah, yeah.
Because actually I look at the South Indian chart primarily myself. Okay. So now you have both, yes? You see
Yes,
both
thank
on
you,
the
thank you,
screen now.
thank you. Now we are seeing both.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you mentioned something. I hit a wrong key and it ruined my screen. But now we've got what we need here. Thank you for mentioning this. Maybe this is why I was hesitant for people to respond. So as I mentioned, this is another student of mine who is traveling from Spain to join this party that's going to the Mela. And you can see she's running, and they're all doing this with their teacher, me, right? And so you can see how that's getting reflected in different ways as well. She's running Jupiter Rahu, period and sub-period. And once again, I would ask you, what do you notice about Jupiter and Rahu in her Vimshamsha based on the principles that I'd laid out earlier?
Mutual aspect.
Again, they're connected. Period and sub-period of two planets connected. Now, she's going to be taking a long journey, right? She's going to be attending a religious festival, religious event. She's doing this with her teacher. Now, this is all happening in the major period of Jupiter, which can symbolize by itself a natural karaka of guru, natural karaka of long distance travel, natural karaka of the religious events and so on and so forth. And then she's running the sub-period of Rahu, which of course gives the results of Jupiter, being in Jupiter's sign and being aspected by Jupiter. But I think some of you know I use this principle that I call Udu's clue, where you're looking at, when you're running a period or sub-period, you're looking at what the nakshatra is, who the nakshatra lord is, and this can give you sometimes, well, always really, additional insight as to what these periods can bring. If we look at Jupiter, you'll see that it's in Ketu's nakshatra, while Ketu is in Jupiter's nakshatra. This brings a very strong connection between Jupiter and Ketu, which can be, this is the way in which Ketu becomes a real moksha karaka, that is someone who is interested in the concept and moksha and lives their life in such a way with that as a goal in mind, which has been true for her. Now, I would ask you to consider who's Rahu's nakshatra and where it is placed. You would see that Rahu is in Venus' nakshatra. Venus, of course, again, here goes to the ninth house. At 28 degrees, it's in Pisces in Vamsha, so it's quite strong. It's in the ninth house of teacher, long distance travel, spiritual events and experiences. So you can see the way in which Jupiter, Rahu, both in the birth chart, but then also in the Vimshamsha, times this kind of very special moment in her life. The Mahakumbh Mela, my understanding is, only happens every 144 years. So, it's quite unique to be able to participate in something like this. All right. So then I'm going to show you yet another student that is going to be going, not with my group, but will be attending here at a different day. And pulling up her chart. Again, see the Vimshotri Dasha, Mercury, Venus. And what do you notice about Mercury and Venus in D20?
Both in
Own
own
house.
houses.
Special dignity, both of them.
Yep.
Venus is in its Trikona sign, Mercury's in its exalted sign. And again, I'm not paying any attention in this case to what house they're in, what house they rule. The principle is just the period and subperiod of two planets that have an exceptional dignity in a divisional chart. And you're running that period and subperiod. What happens? After this student decided to go to the Kumbh Mela, her mother, and they're coming from New York, in the US, and her mother decided she wanted to go too. And I'm now going to show you her chart. If you look at the Dasha sequence, you can see it's Venus-Saturn. What do you notice about Venus-Saturn in her Vimshamsha?
They are conjunct and Saturn in the own house and accompanied by Jupiter.
Exactly. So they're together. Remember that idea? Period and subperiod, two planets together in the divisional chart. In this case, Saturn also has an exceptional dignity, being in Aquarius, its Dracona sign, and then see the addition of Jupiter, the natural karaka of these sorts of things. In fact, that these two planets, Saturn and Venus and Saturn, the period and subperiod lord, are under the influence of two benefics. But Jupiter in particular here is significant that way. Now, when the daughter was going and the mother decided to go, then the sister-in-law decided to go too. And so I'm now showing you her chart.
Also to add that moon is in a special dignity because it receives the aspect of 4 grahas in Vimshamsha.
It is, and so it forms that Jaimini Yoga, but it's not what's being activated at the moment.
Oh, but it is aspecting the sign, Guruji.
I see. Yes, I see. Okay, good. I see what you're saying. So this is the sister-in-law, and oddly enough, she's running Saturn Venus, the reverse of what the mother was running. And I ask you again to consider what is the condition of these planets in D20.
Dignity as usual, Saturn in own house, Venus exalted, and Venus
Exactly. I'll show you one more student, a chart of one more student of mine who is accompanying me with the others that I showed you. And she's coming from Moscow, Russia. So it's a real international group, you might say. In this case, she's running the same period and sub-period. But again, I want you to see placement in Vimshamsha. You can see just as of last December, she moved into K2, and since she's going to be having this experience on February 9th, if I pull it out to a third level, K2 Mars, then you'll see the Dasha sequence in Vimshotri when this is happening. And, you see that, the Rahu K2, they're always in axes, right? And so you can see with the Vimshamsha here, that axis is connected to the ascendant, that idea. Mars here as a sub-period lord is well placed in the 9th house. So I've shown you now a number of examples of people all attending the Kumbh Mela, and this has been this little research that I've done recently about how this is all getting reflected in their D20s charts. Lastly, I'll show my chart this way, and I want to talk about it a little bit more extensively for reasons that you'll see in a moment. So I'm running Saturn Rahu. So starting with the birth chart, does anyone see some significant yoga that can incline a person towards spiritual life, spiritual activities? that this period and subperiod activates in my own birth chart. This yoga is given in the Sanskrit classic Paladipika. Does anybody have any idea what I might be talking about? And by the way, one of the descriptions of this yoga is that a person would have illustrious students, which I've been having the good fortune of having. I'm talking to some of them right now. So the yoga is, sorry, go ahead. Somebody has an answer?
Moon and Ketu in 12th?
Well, that's not the yoga that I'm talking about. Now, in the Jaimini system, when the AK is in the 12th house with K2, that this is an indication of someone who would be interested in and value the idea of obtaining spiritual liberation and work in their life towards that goal, which has been true for me. So that's from the Jaimini point of view. The yoga that I'm referring to is what's called Varinchi yoga. There are 3 yogas in Parashara Hora, in Paladipika, each related to one aspect of the Hindu Trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. The Shiva variety is defined by when Saturn, Jupiter, and the 5th Lord are all in angles or trions and in strength in order to give the better sort of manifestations of this yoga. So in this case, in my case, Saturn and Jupiter are both in angles. Saturn actually happens to be the 5th Lord, so it fulfills that 5th Lord idea. And they do have strength because Jupiter's in its own sign, and Saturn, if you saw Navamsha, goes to Aquarius. So think about what kind of results Rahu gives. How would you interpret what kind of results Rahu would give? What would we look at here? Whose results does Rahu give as a Chayagraha?
Saturn?
Saturn's results.
Saturn.
Now, who's its nakshatra lord? Who's its
And
nakshatra?
Jupiter.
And right.
Jupiter.
So everyone should see how Saturn Rahu is essentially a lot like saying Saturn Jupiter. So in other words, it activates this Varinchi yoga in my chart. And the result have been a lot of different things, but the fact that I'm doing this kind of pilgrimage at this time is part of that. The Sanskrit classic Bhattara Ratnakara highlights Rahu under certain conditions in particular as being something that can give you what K and Rao would call extroverted spirituality. Extroverted spirituality is when you're doing something externally that's spiritually motivated, like a pilgrimage. But now if you look at my Vimshamsha, again, first of all, what do you notice about Saturn? And what do you know about Saturn and Rahu?
Saturn exalted.
Mutual
And
aspect.
Mutual aspect.
And again, they're connected. I'm glad people are responding. So, and here it should be noted also that Saturn is the Lagna Lord of this division, which I know to be accurate. And just to give me a little more idea about how you could use this divisional chart to predict this way, I made probably the most significant pilgrimage to India that I made was when I went to all the sacred sites in the north of India, in the Himalayas. I'm talking about Kedarnath, Baldernath, Devapragya, Rishikesh, Jitormath. This was all in 2014, October, when I was running Saturn Mercury. So where's Mercury? Mercury is in the 1st house of this division. And of course, it has directional strength. If you take lordships here, which I would, you would see that Mercury is also the 9th lord. It was also during this time that I built a small temple in my backyard where I began doing Vedic rituals such as puja, yagya, arati, and so on. So you can see that the period Saturn-Mercury was very significant in my life with regards to these sorts of activities and how the Vimshamsha very clearly shows that, right? But I want to even go back to a very early time in my life. And I can remember being rather amazed by this when I was first studying Jyotish and seeing the way Jyotish and this divisional chart timed a particular period and sub-period. I was born into a very Catholic family and sent to Catholic schools. And as a boy growing up in a Catholic school, and it's called elementary school there, you have the opportunity of becoming what's called an altar boy. An altar boy is someone who assists the priest in the performance of the main ritual in Catholicism, which is what's called the celebration of the Mass. And not only did I become an altar boy, but in my last year in elementary school, I was elected to be one of the heads of the altar boys. And this was happening. And the result of that is that you were the one that served the priest in the very high rituals, like on Easter and Christmas, which are some of the main holy days in Catholicism. And this was happening when? It was happening in my moon Saturn period and subperiod, followed by the moon Mercury period and subperiod. And so you can see the way in which, again, the Vimshamsha, and I was very active this way. I was up at the altar with priests, helping them to perform this ritual. And you can see the way in which the Vimshamsha of my chart really timed this period in my life very exactly. Because again, if you looked at Moon Saturn, even Moon Mercury in the birth chart, you wouldn't think about this as a result of this kind of activity. It's only by the use of the Vimshamsha that this would be clear to you, right? So this is what I wanted to share with you today. I hope it's not everything you've already known or done before, but I wanted to open it to any thoughts or questions you have about this. I've written a book called Secrets of the Dishamsha, and it's all about secrets here are just 10 principles that I apply to using in predicting with divisional charts. I've just shown you 3 of them, okay? But ones that I've found pretty effective. So, how do I use this? So when a person's moving into a new period or maybe a new sub-period, right? You can get a screen up on your astrological programs that shows you all 16 Parashara divisions, right? You can see Navamsha, you can see Drekana, you can see D4, D7. And what I'm always looking for is to see if the planets in those divisions are in any exceptional condition, to see if any of them are in the Lagna, to see if any of them, period and sub-period, are connected. And this is how I identify periods in this way. But of course, you're always looking for something in the birth chart also that might suggest this event. But as many of you may have shown, and I've shown you examples here, sometimes a period and sub-period doesn't show this event, a particular event at all in the Rashi. It's only the divisional chart itself that you'd be able to predict it with. And then what I'm not showing you is that I'm always evaluating the same thing in the Jaimini system. And I'm looking for confluence. Does both systems show this kind of event happening at the same time? If I see that, then I'm much more confident that I'm actually seeing something that is, in fact, going to manifest as a result of this person's karma. So that's what I had to share with you today. And, we can go on, we can look at other things, but I wanted to throw it open to any questions that people have, give students an opportunity about this. And I invite you to take your own charts and test these things out. Okay?
I think I have this observation that when you spoke about the divisional charts, as in this the examples that you had used, we noticed a very important point that usually when it comes to divisional charts, we are all worried. We're not sure about the time of birth, and there is this accuracy problem. But if we can make a prediction just out of the positions of planets in the sign itself, instead of using it vis-a-vis the ascendant in a divisional chart, then you no longer are, you should be worried about the accuracy of time of birth. For example, you had used the dignities of planets in divisional chart, and you have not referred to the ascendant itself, whereas ascendant in any divisional chart is very time sensitive as we go higher up the divisions, right? Like Sashthyamsa, and all these things like Vimshamsa, everything. But so I think usually what is a put off for divisional chart is, we don't have the exact time of birth, so let's not look into it. Now you have now expressed a very important point. Don't worry about that. You could still use the zodiac signs and make predictions just from the divisional chart. For example, you said a planet is exalted, a planet is its own sign, and then look at each other like how they are related into the the chart. Two people are together, two planets are together, and that is enough, right? So
Oh,
we should all start to use the divisional chart and not worry too much about the accuracy of the time of birth, relating to the divisional chart lagna. That's the point I'm just making here.
and it's a beautiful point, and I'm glad you made it. 2 out of 3 of those principles that I shared that I've used to predict the divisionals are not dependent upon a correct divisional logna.
Exactly.
Two planets together, 2 planets in good dignity, which is specifically why I shared those, because we all know accurate birth time is the biggest problem and the biggest difficulty in Jyotish. And I heard Kane Rao say, give me a correct birth time with correct divisional charts, I'll predict brilliantly. Give me an incorrect birth time with incorrect divisional charts, I'll fail miserably. If I'm trying to use them, right? But these are a couple of principles that aren't dependent upon that. Now, if you'll permit me, since we still have some time left yet, do
We have.
still? Yeah.
And meanwhile, Gautam has on the chat, he has uploaded a visual, a slide, which talks about the Vrinci yoga that Marc Boney has in his chart. So if you can click that, maybe, I don't know if it can be shared straight away.
Or I will quickly share it.
Okay, quickly share it for the benefit of the students.
And let me just permit me to say that, and I'm sure this is true for your guru, I really emphasize knowing yogas. I feel like yogas are the essence of Jyotish along with dashas, and it's what gives it its predictive power. The degree that you can see yogas in the birth chart is the degree in which you can understand what a person's prarabdha karma is, their static potentials in this lifetime. And then if you're running periods of certain planets, the degree in which you can see that they're involved in yogas, you can predict based on that. If you are not able to see yogas, then you will be completely miss the significance of certain periods. So if you permit me to share a screen again, let me pull my program back up and I'll demonstrate how knowing this prediction, of course, we always remember the yogas that are in our own chart the easiest, right? And let me show you how knowing this yoga allowed me to not so much make a prediction, but see something that happened in a person's earlier in their life. So in October of 2022 is one of the times I was in Chennai, but I was also on a pilgrimage with a bunch of other students, actually mostly Russian students, and we had a wonderful guide, an Indian man, whose chart I'm trying to pull up here. I will find it. Pradeep. I'll find it here. Just give me a moment. Maybe I won't be able to find it. Oh, sorry. Well, what I was going to show you is I was going to show you a chart where this person also had a good, well, I'll show you another chart. Some of you may be familiar with another prominent American astrologer, also a student of K.N. Rao's. And let me pull up his chart. I know I can find it. His name is Von Paul Manley. Some of you may recognize the name. Von Paul has been a longtime friend. He's a colleague. We both studied with K.N. Rao, and we stay in contact, all that sort of thing. Here it is. You all should be seeing a chart with Capricorn Lagna now, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So now remember the definition of Vrinci Yoga that you just learned about how it involves 3 planets, Saturn, Jupiter, and the 5th Lord. And they should all be in angles and trines. And they should, if you get the best quality of this yoga, the planets are going to need to have a source of strength. So now, as you can see in his chart, right in the ascendant, he has this combination of Saturn and Jupiter. Saturn, of course, giving also Sasha Yoga, that Mahapurush Yoga. And it's exceptionally strong here because it's also Vargotama, besides being its own sign, the Lagna Lord in the Lagna. And it's with Jupiter, Jupiter being here getting Nicha Bhanga because it's with its sign lord. And if you focus in on the fifth lord Venus, you'll see that it has two sources of strength. It's both Vargotama and it's also getting directional strength in the fourth house. So very strong Varunchi Yoga. He also has been very deeply involved in the Vedic tradition of knowledge, not just Jyotish, but also yoga and the philosophical aspects that come from India, the Shad Darshanas. And you can see that he gets the right dasha at the right time to get the fruit of these yogas, because back at age 33 in 1994, he starts running 16 years of Jupiter, and then this is followed by the 19 years of Saturn, which he's been in. And then you can look at periods and sub-periods that are going to particularly activate this. Now, you can see that from 2017 to 2020, he ran Saturn Venus, which of course are activating both Vargotama, both a part of this yoga. And what Von Paul is particularly known for is his skill at doing birth time rectification with the methodology taught to us by K.N. Rao, which is based on seeing the timing of life events, adjusting the birth time in connection with the divisional charts in order to have them better reflect that timing. In other words, it's an objective method. It's based on an empirical process, not sort of some subjective process. And who would be this became something of a speciality of his. And some of you may be aware that he wrote a very good book on the subject called Birth Time Rectification. And this book was written and published exactly in this period and sub-period, Saturn, Venus. What planet is said to rule time? Kala. What planet is most connected to the idea of time and the unfoldment of time?
Saturn?
Saturn. So here's a person who's specializing in birth time rectification, who has the planet of time so strong in his chart as a part of this Varunchi Yoga, and he writes a very good book on birth time rectification, which I can recommend to all of you. So this would be another illustration of Varunchi Yoga. Now,
in the beginning, you had shown you displayed a slide where you said dignity might also mean parivartana or nicha bhanga.
Correct.
Or something very special, right? So, for example, in your case, Vrinchi Yoga has a Jupiter that is involved in a Panchamaha Yoga.
Right.
Right. So, for example, here we have a Nicha Bhanga Raj Yoga in ascendant, right? So, maybe after learning about a yoga, and if you can add one more feather to the cap by saying it's moreover this also from another point of view, then will that not be considered as an additional dignity?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. No, Barack Obama, former U.S. president, his Capricorn Lagna has this very same combination, right?
Exactly. Yes. Nicha Bhanga Raj.
Nicha Bhanga Raja Yoga, and it was in Jupiter major period, and I had predicted it that he would become president. He has Gauri Yoga in his chart, moon defined by when the moon is in either Taurus or Cancer in an angle or trine, getting the aspect of Jupiter. If you can picture it here, his moon is in Taurus.
Yes.
So
There's so much Saturn in him that he became the 44th president, which is 4 plus 4, 8. And I've been always associating 8 with Saturn.
I hadn't been aware of that. That's an interesting observation. Let me show you one more. There is someone who is also a longtime student of K.N. Rao. In fact, he was with him in Delhi for 5 years, studying as a part of his research groups every weekend. He's from Japan. And he then went back to Japan and started a school there. I was invited to teach there this last April. Wonderful man. And you'll see here when I bring the chart up that what will you take note of here? I have too many charts. Okay, here it is. Like me, you'll see that he has Virgo Lagna. And he has I have the mutual aspect, he has the conjunction of Saturn.
Conjunction.
And just as Sir was saying, it's a part of a Mahapurush yoga.
Correct.
Of course, it's also from say Angle Trine Raja Yoga. So there's more going on here than just the Vrinci Yoga. But if you don't see that it's also Vrinci Yoga, you don't quite understand the way he's also been absolutely steeped in the spiritual tradition of India, in a Veda and a Vedanga. Of course, Jyotish is a Vedanga. And when was this going on in particular? Right in Saturn Jupiter. And by the way, he's now running his Mercury major period, forming that 9-10 Raja Yoga in the sixth. But think about what kind of combination that is from the moon, Mercury, Venus, and also then from Dasha Lagna. The man spends 10 hours a day translating the best Jyotish texts into Japanese, including books of K.M. Rao's, of course, actually some of my books. So that Jyotish and this knowledge of Jyotish would be available to the Japanese students who don't speak English or can't read English. So it's actually doing quite an exceptional service to bringing out this knowledge of Jyotish to the Japanese audience. All right, well, this is what I had to share with you today. Thank you for your kind attention. Again, if there's any final questions or comments that someone wants to make.
I have a question, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, so the question is, we talked about the exalted planets or planets in yoga in the divisional charts, for example, D20 or D9. But if the planets are debilitated, then what do they show as a promise in the spirituality or whatever?
Well, let's take won't pull it up here, but I'll just tell you about it. Take John F. Kennedy, former US president. Of course, his career ended when he was assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
He was assassinated in Jupiter Saturn. If you look at his D10, it's the period and sub-period of two planets in their debilitation sign.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
The opposite effect.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, you have to be a little bit careful there because you want to see if the debilitated planet is Nichabanga. And if it's falling in an angle, particularly in the Lagna, it could give Nichabanga Raja Yoga, in which case it actually will bring very good results that way. Again, I won't pull it up, but there's this famous American movie star, Sylvester Stallone. He did these movies, the Rocky movies. He's a boxer, right? Some of you may know of this. If you look at this happened in his Jupiter major period. If you look at his D10, Jupiter's in the Lagna in Capricorn, but it's with an exalted Mars, and it gave Nichabanga Raja Yoga. So when you're seeing a debilitated planet, really in any divisional chart or the Rashi, you have to examine it more closely. Is it truly debilitated, right?
Okay.
If you look at John F. Kennedy's Jupiter and Saturn in his D10, they're truly debilitated.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
This should answer your question. Good question.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else before we conclude with a Sanskrit prayer?
Can we by any chance, can we by any chance extend the same thing, the bad yogas, for example, in divisional chart, relative position of these two planets, maybe if they are from 6, 8, 12, can we also say that also could have some negative effects from each other?
Yes. In my book, Secrets of Dashamsha, the eighth house from the eighth, which is the third house, right, can be called transition or termination houses. And I show many examples, and I could show them to you now if we had more time. Person running periods of planets in such houses, there's career breaks. Sometimes that career break happens because they choose to make a career break, and sometimes it happens just because they lose their job, right? And so, sure. And, it was a real revelation for me to discover that all the Graha yogas given in the ancient texts can and should be applied to divisional charts, and you'll find them working very well, particularly Moon-Jupiter combinations. I predicted on this basis many, many times. So again, this is why I really encourage everybody to learn yogas. And then people ask me the questions, well, there's so many of them. Where do you start? My answer is the yoga is given in Parashvahora and the yoga is given in Paladipika. If you learn the yogas in those two Sanskrit texts, they'll go a long way for making you a very good Jyotishi. Anything else? Can we conclude then with our Sanskrit prayer? Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Mritam Gamaya Sarvesham Swasti Bhavatu Sarvesham Shanti Bhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Now I will finally mention that I am coming to teach in Chennai. It'll be from the 13th through the 16th. That's a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And the topic is the astrology of professions. And for the details, Gautam, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, it has the details for that. All right.
Sure.
And I would welcome everyone's participation. I know I am going to see some of you, particularly you, sir. I'm going to see you. Hope we can share a meal together and catch up. So I look forward to all of that. All right. Then
Yes.
with that, I will say, be well, everyone. Namaste. And I will conclude the session. All right.
Yes.
Bye for now.
Okay, thank you.
Namaste.
It's wonderful having you with us, and we are very glad that you gave us a lot of ideas, and there's a lot of learning every time we meet you. So we hope to have more of that when you come here in Chennai, and I'm sure I'm going to circulate this video to all of our students, and we hope to have a good 3-day session, right? So
Yeah. Well, 4-day session. 4-day session.
a 4-day session. So okay.
Yeah.
So we are looking forward to it, and thank you on behalf of this class. We are very grateful to you. Anyone else wants to say a big thank you to Guruji Marc Boney? Please, you can do it now.
I'm seeing it in the chat. Okay.
Thank you so much,
Marc
Guruji.
Boney, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Will the
Thank
session
you.
be
Thank you,
available
Boney,
online
sir.
with a 4-day session?
Yes, the course is also online. It's being
Okay,
streamed.
thank you.
Yeah, you don't have to be there in person. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.